Thank you so much. Let me share my screen. So I wonder how many of you are snowed in as we are here on the West Coast of the US and enjoying a cozy day at home. We will be talking today about a cosmology, cosmologies in general, and in particular, a potential cosmology of the future. And I'll explain what I mean by that as we go. Humanity has, for as long as it's been thinking and looking up at the stars, wondering about the universe as a whole. How does it work? What's it made of? Where did it come from? And what is our place in it? And this has given rise over the long course of human history to a huge proliferation of different cosmological ideas, which in light of modern science, we look back on them and maybe snicker a little bit at how people could have been so simple in their thinking, how they could have, believed things like, the universe being created by different kinds of animal spirits and so forth. But there are, behind the various stories that people over the millennia have told about our place in the cosmos, behind all the differences in the details, because all of them differ completely in the details, I think we can see that there are certain things that they have in common. And we're going to start here and then move through a little bit of modern cosmology and then a little bit beyond modern cosmology to what might lie beyond. But starting with the ancient cosmologies, if we were to try to, the impossible task of taking these various theories of creation and our place in it and try to abstract from it, what do they have in common? We would find certain elements that are almost universal to these ancient cosmologies. The idea that order arises from chaos, oftentimes a watery chaos, some ancient sea or something like that. Water arises, order arises from it. The spirit breathes over the surface of the waters in the first verses of the book of Genesis, and so forth. That this breathing of order from chaos gives rise to what usually is a kind of a fixed hierarchy of degrees. There's a lower degree of existence, a higher degree of existence, extending from the physical world and the animals all the way up to realms of angels and so forth. This universe of our ancient ancestors and the cosmologies which in many ways persist into the present day are overflowing with purpose and with consciousness. They were created by consciousness. They give rise to consciousness as an intrinsic element of their story. And this universe that they give rise to is very human-centric. We are the star players on the stage of this of the universe. This is my one slide on ancient cosmologies, just to introduce the idea that these thoughts about human origins persist way back in time, and despite their differences, they have a great deal in common. Over the past century, these ancient cosmologies have given way to modern physical cosmology, and it's been about a century. And of course, the modern science has been around for several centuries, but it's really only in the past century that we've been able to investigate scientifically and say some fairly definite things about our universe writ large. And this was enabled, first of all, by Einstein's completion of his theory of general relativity, which says how gravity works In the universe at large, one can for the first time model a universe and ask, how might this evolve according to the laws of physics? Complementary to this great theoretical leap forward was the observational leaps forward. Of course, beginning with the invention of the telescope in Galileo's time several centuries ago, but really, again, in the past century, was the first time the telescopes became powerful enough, the observational methods became powerful enough that it was determined that the stars that we see out in the sky are not just randomly scattered, but they are ordered into a kind of an island universe. This band of stars across the sky that we see on a clear, dark night is looking at our galaxy of stars edge on. And little fuzzy patches that you can see in one case by the unaided eye, but in most cases through the aid of telescopes, are other island universes that exist beyond the reach of our island universe. This is such a new idea. We take it for granted now because we're all taught this in school. But the idea that we live in, on the outskirts of one of a potentially infinite number of these island universes is a truly massive discovery, which I think has yet to really filter down into our consciousness just how small we are in relation to the universe. And it's not just that these observations haven't just given us this view of us afloat in this massive sea of stars and galaxies, but they've also given us an idea about how it might have evolved in the past. The detailed examination of these, of the spectral signatures, the details of the light emanating from these galaxies have been shown it has been shown from their observation that the universe is expanding, that those island universes, those galaxies which are farthest away from us are moving the fastest away from us. And one can extrapolate from that backwards in time to an early state of the universe in which everything was closer together, in which the densities and temperatures of the universe were much higher than they are now. And this early dense state of the universe has been coined the Big Bang. The certainty that scientists have that this is a reasonably accurate picture of our universe and its history has been enabled by the painstaking collection of evidence, testing of theories by many thousands of scientists over more than a century, and aided by instrumentation that continues to improve by orders of magnitude, from the earliest telescope of Galileo to the James Webb telescope that's currently making spectacular observations today. Also, we have to admit that a little bit of luck is involved. The fact that we can make these observations of the universe around us, the fact that our atmosphere is transparent to the electromagnetic waves coming from these distant stars, that the light from distant stars and galaxies is not somehow attenuated by intervening clouds of gas and dust and so forth. The fact that we don't live in the middle of a nebula, for example, allows us to look out with such a great distance that we're able to make these incredible observations and to come to these conclusions about the nature of our cosmos, that it is as big as it is, that it has the long history that it has, which we can extrapolate backwards 13, 14 billion years to this early period of expansion. And so the predictions of modern cosmology then are based upon, I won't go into any of these details, but they're based upon intersecting lines of evidence, any one of which would not be conclusive, but the combination of which gives us a very good picture of how the universe evolved from this early state. And it's very difficult to construct any other consistent picture that's significantly different from it, that is consistent with all of these available facts. The expansion of galaxies, the cosmic microwave background radiation, which is the afterglow of the Big Bang, the ratio of abundances of light elements in the universe, hydrogen and helium and other light elements, and the large-scale distribution of galaxies themselves. All of these are these lines of evidence leading to these conclusions of modern cosmology. Of course, no one would say that this picture of modern cosmology is complete. There are some details that still have to be filled out. Some little details, let us say. What about dark matter? What about dark energy? It appears that everything that we can observe is only a few percent of the sum total of the mass energy of the universe. In what does that invisible sector consist? Some sort of particle that has yet to be detected, or is the matter somehow locked up in ways that we can't detect? Otherwise, ordinary matter locked up in ways we can't detect. And beyond that, of course, a little detail to fill out is, well, why do we live in this universe? Why is this universe structured the way it is? Why are the laws of physics what they are? Not just why this particular universe with this particular arrangement of stars and galaxies, but why this particular arrangement of physical laws? These are open questions for physics and science in general, and for cosmology in particular. And although progress on them has been somewhat stalled and somewhat slow over the last few decades, the incredible advance in observational power from these satellite telescopes, from gravitational wave observations on the surface of the Earth, and other advances give us hope that some of these questions can be answered. Another little detail, though, to fill out in our modern cosmology, in our picture of the universe, what about life and consciousness? What about us? It seems as though we have a spectacularly complete and powerful description of the physical universe, extrapolating backwards 13.7 billion years, explaining just about everything we can see and observe, both in the world beyond, with our telescopes, but also on our own planet, down to microscopic scales. But what about us? This is where the human-centric, consciousness-centric cosmologies of the past, in giving way to this non-human-centric physical cosmology of the present, one gets a sense that something has dropped out. Something important has been dropped out of consideration. A human scale and human-centric universe has been replaced by these inconceivably vast distance and time scales, a universe which vastly is void and inhospitable to any kind of life, let alone human life. A universe which is trending towards disorder. Entropy is the order of the universe on large time scales. The clock of the universe is winding down, and as far as we can tell, all life will eventually pass away into lifelessness. And there's no place for life and consciousness in any case, except as a kind of a fortunate accident, as something which, as unlikely as it appears to be, having to come about through the random confluence of molecules on the surface of our planet billions of years ago, that life is simply accidental, and we're lucky to be here. That the universe is big enough and old enough for this accident to have come into being, for the dice to have been rolled enough times for us to have happened to have popped into existence. But that's as far as our modern cosmological picture can say about life, is that it's a fortunate accident. So this new cosmic narrative, then, this narrative of modern physical cosmology, tells us that the bad explanations, the old cosmologies, the old ways of looking at the universe, the human-centric ones, have been replaced by better and continually improving explanations. And the new explanations, in these new explanations, we're not the center of things. After all, Why be self-centered? You know, that's an aspect of our, maybe of our collective childhood. We just have to get over ourselves. We have to accept that we're accidental products of a purposeless universe. Many popular scientists have put this in different ways. I think Stephen Hawking wins the prize for the best way of describing this modern view, that the human race is just a chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet orbiting around a very average star in the outer suburb of one among 100 billion galaxies. So we're nothing. So another way of thinking about what's happened is that the old ideas of our collective childhood have given way to the new ideas of our collective maturity. The old ideas which saw the universe from the inside, so to speak, or the inside view, a subjective view that was geocentric, centered on our planet, that saw order arising from chaos, that saw these fixed hierarchies emerging according to some external consciousness, in which humans and consciousness are central, and in which purpose is infused in all things. That gave way to our maturity. Maybe you could say cynical maturity. You could say we just know more, and we realize now that, you know, viewing things objectively according to modern science, there's no center to the universe. Chaos actually evolves from order, not the other way around. Hierarchies are not fixed, but dynamic through the process of biological evolution, that we human beings are incidental upon the surface of this planet, and there is no overarching purpose. We just have to accept that, get over it, maybe come up with our own individual purpose, or our collective purpose that we kind of decide together, and that's the best that we can do. And just to put an exclamation point on that, we can historically put this as a kind of pre-Enlightenment view versus post-Enlightenment view. You know, now that we're adults, we see that that purpose was always something which we imposed upon the universe in the first place. These two ways of looking at the world, you know, human-centric and objective, you know, pre-scientific and scientific, was nicely already summed up in ancient times by the early Christian theologian Tertullian, where he says, "What has Athens to do with Jerusalem? You know, what does the logical, science-minded way of looking at the universe so well exemplified by the ancient Greeks? What does that have to do with the religious, spiritual, conscious-centered way of thinking exemplified by Jerusalem and the prophets that emerged therefrom?" So is that the picture? Or is there a reason to look beyond this picture to a third stage beyond? And that's where the majority of this presentation is going. So a couple of reasons to look beyond this picture. Is it a complete narrative? Is it true to the human experience? Does it include all relevant phenomena? Does it explain life and conscious adequately for us? And secondly, is it useful? That is, and this is a subtle but I think important point that underlies really my whole presentation. Among competing theories that equally fit the evidence, are we allowed to pick the one that works the best for us? So as an example of someone who would disagree with this, we have someone like Bertrand Russell, very famous philosopher of the early 20th century, a proponent of logical positivism. We should believe only that which we can prove. In a famous late interview that he gave not long before he died, they asked him to sort of give his wisdom, dispense his wisdom for us. And he said some very nice things, but one of the things he said, I would not necessarily agree with. And the reason I want to highlight it is because it sounds so reasonable on the face of it. And first of all, the moral thing he wanted to say is wonderful. It's love is wise and hatred is foolish. So when it comes to the sphere of morality, there's really nothing to be objected about. But the intellectual thing that Bertrand Russell had to say, I think, is the thing that we can rightly ask ourselves: is this sufficient. And the thing he wanted to say was, when you are studying any matter or considering any philosophy, ask yourself only, what are the facts? And what is the truth that the facts bear out? Never let yourself be diverted either by what you wish to believe or by what you think would have beneficent social effects if it were believed. And I think maybe as a suggestion of a way to think beyond that, because it's always the case that the sum total of the facts available to us do not constrain the possibilities to a single possibility. The facts that we actually have access to, and by facts, let me just suggest the scientific facts that about which there is near universal assent. Those facts do not constrain the kinds of universes to a single kind of universe. There are many possibilities consistent with the facts as we see them. And if that's the case, then what do you do with someone like a Bertrand Russell, who says, well, you should only believe what you can actually prove scientifically? I think you'll end up with something a little bit more like what Baha'u'llah said in his Tablet to Monarchy Sahib. And this is one of the most famous passages, also quoted in Gleanings. And I think Baha'u'llah is suggesting a different way of thinking about religion, a different way of thinking about religious truth, not as something which is scientifically proven, not something which can be universally accepted as a set of facts, as let's say, a system of knowledge delivered which can be proven, but rather as a remedy for a particular ailment which is suited to a particular age. And this is how Baha'u'llah says it: the all-knowing physician hath his finger on the pulse of mankind. He perceiveth the disease and prescribeth in his unerring wisdom the remedy. Every age hath its own problem, and every soul its particular aspiration. The remedy the world needeth in its present-day afflictions can never be the same as that which a subsequent age may require. And of course, this is central to the Baha'i concept of progressive revelation and the relativity of religious truth, that there is no single package of dogmatic finalities that at any point in our history we can say is determinative of truth. Not even that we're headed towards that, and at some point we'll receive that final revelation of determinative truth. We are always, but never reaching. We're always approaching, but never reaching the divine. We're always striving towards the transcendent. We're always moving back towards the origin point, evolving and progressing back towards the origin point. And that constant dynamism of that motion back towards the origin is what guarantees that religion remains a dynamic entity, always changing. Even when it comes to fundamental, what we might have thought of as being fundamental theological propositions. You know, the theological proposition that there is only one God is something which is pretty new on the historical scene. You know, we can say, well, maybe it was the Pharaoh Akhenaten before the time of Moses. Maybe it was one of the Old Testament prophets that records humanity's the first introduction of this idea of monotheism. Maybe it came about earlier or in different cultures, but has been forgotten because it wasn't put down in a written text. But before that, humanity did just fine believing in a pantheon of gods, or believing in animal spirits that worked through and underlied all physical phenomena. That's another mode of spirituality, another mode of belief, which was suited to a particular time and place. And so we can think of even things like the theologies, how we think about God as being part of the remedy, which is a function of time and place. Baha'u'llah's statement, I think, is really quite a radical one, because it takes us out of the realm of thinking of religion as a fixed or archetypal set of doctrines and into something which is far more fluid. It is a remedy diagnosed by the physician, which is specific to time and place. So bringing this back to the question of cosmologies, how do we look at the world? You know, if we're going to survive on this planet together, we need a common narrative. Humanity needs to find a common narrative that, while being consistent with the known facts, must of necessity reach into domains that are not provable. And as I'll talk about in the final slides, this narrative has to be capable of multiple interpretations. And how we get there, because what's an example of a narrative that's capable of multiple interpretations? This common narrative ought to be, first and foremost, consistent with the available scientific facts of the universe. It should hopefully be aligned with aspects of reality for which we do not yet possess the facts. It should be useful for the present pressing needs of humanity. It should be a remedy. As Baha'u'llah says, the pressing need of humanity today, the illness of humanity today, is disunity. And the remedy is that all people should become united as one, that a world civilization should emerge. And this narrative should also be flexible enough to evolve as our knowledge increases and to accommodate differing perspectives. And just as an example of how you can take a given set of facts and project different narratives onto it, which are both consistent with the facts. I offer two quotations, one which you've already seen, from prominent scientists speaking from a non-religious perspective, speaking from a perspective of scientific atheism. Both Hawking and Stephen Hawking and Carl Sagan were scientific atheists. They didn't believe in an overarching purpose to the universe. But listen to how they describe the universe. Stephen Hawking says the human race is just a chemical scum on a moderately sized planet. We've seen that quotation. Carl Sagan takes the same set of facts and he projects it in a very different way. He says, we are a way for the cosmos to know itself. This is the difference between a non-consciousness centered and a consciousness centered way of looking at the universe. Both of them can be made consistent with the physical facts of the universe as we see it. So the narrative that I'll be proposing, and we have yet to get to the meat of this, so apologies in advance because there's a lot coming. The narrative that I'll be proposing is I'm not proposing a scientific theory. I'm proposing a story, which is, a story is not the right word. I'm proposing a new kind of sacred narrative consistent with available facts of the universe, which might help. I suppose that's the best way of putting it. And it's in the spirit of Plato's Timaeus. A couple of thousand years ago, Plato and Socrates, with Socrates particularly as recorded by Plato, in one of his many conversations recorded in his dialogues, proposed a cosmology. You know, they got into this topic of cosmology. Where did everything come from? How did everything come to be the way it is now? And we have this cosmology emerging in the Timaeus, one of the dialogues of Plato, with some fantastical elements, with some other elements that he thought important from a philosophical point of view to establish, such as that there was a single origin to things, that order arises from chaos, and so forth. But the way he prefaces it is very, I think, important. He doesn't say, here's the way it is. He says, look, nobody knows how it really is. Nobody has access to the ultimate layer of reality, and we're never going to have access to that. So, but what we can do is we can adduce probabilities as likely as others. We can tell a tale which is probable and inquire no further. It's in that spirit that we can think of grand narratives, sacred narratives, that change from age to age, as Baha'u'llah says, along with the remedy, as human-centric means of navigating the universe, kind of like a subway map. A subway map is a human-centric means of navigating a city. And in many ways, the subway map is extremely inaccurate. If you try to overlay that subway map on the actual terrain of the city, it's not going to match up. Point by point, station by station, it's a distorted image, a distorted mapping of the underlying physical topography of the city. And yet nobody questions the subway map as, for being so distorted. People understand that the subway map has a human-centric purpose to get you from point A to point B as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And they also understand that that subway map is not completely disconnected from the underlying topography of the city. It's actually correlated with that underlying topography, but not necessarily in matters of detail. It stretches distances. It might even exchange, north-south relationships. Not all of the subway stations here, which seem to be north of others, are actually north of others. They might be south of others. So even relative directions may not be preserved in the subway map. But what it recommends to us is its usefulness. And maybe it's this in that same way we should think of the grand spiritual narratives of the great prophets as remedies for illnesses of the age, which are correlated with underlying reality. Exactly in what way they're correlated, we can't say, because we don't have access to that underlying reality. But what we can say is, are these useful? Are these remedies? And if they're good remedies, then that means there's a pretty good chance that it is correlated with underlying reality. But in the end, all we really have access to is, does it work or not? We have access to a kind of pragmatic criterion. So as a kind of starting point of what a new narrative might be, I'll take a paragraph of Baha'u'llah from the Book of Certitude, from the Kitab-i-Gan, in which he actually quotes from the Quran, in which he says, even as he hath revealed, we will surely show them our signs in the world and within themselves. And again he saith, and also in your own selves will ye not then behold the signs of God? And yet again he revealeth, and be ye not like those who forget God, and whom he hath therefore caused to forget their own selves. In this connection, he who is the eternal king hath spoken, he hath known God who hath known himself. But it's particularly the first quotation that I want to highlight as giving this idea of a kind of complementarity between the horizons, between what's in the world and what's in their own selves. The original Arabic from the Quran is below here. It says, "Sanurihim ayatina fil afaqi wa fi anfusihim hatta yatabayyana lahum innahu al-haq." So it literally says, we show them our signs in the horizons and within their own souls. So we have this idea of there's something of the signs of God within us, i.e. our conscious reality, and there's something of the signs of God out in the cosmos, out there. And what we'll be adding to this as we move along through the slides that follow is an idea that those inner horizons and the outer horizons are not just correlated to each other, but are in some way generative of each other and reflect each other. That mind and matter, to put it another way, are co-generative of each other. So what I'll be looking at in the slides to come, we'll pause for a moment, are some themes in the Baha'i writings related to cosmos and consciousness, and what Abdu'l-Baha called divine philosophy in several of his talks and tablets. Is a beautiful phrase which I think Baha'is could use this a little bit more because it's such a resonant phrase for me. And what we'll be using, because we're going to be digging kind of deeply into many Baha'i texts to find some of these themes, and how do you refer to Baha'i writings, especially when there are many provisional translations, writings that are not yet available in authorized translation, as well as many authorized translations. I'll be using inventory codes in a partial inventory of the works of the central figures of the Baha'i faith that I produced a few years ago, and which is available on by the hyperlink at the bottom of this slide, and which includes as an appendix a number of these topics in divine philosophy, which are all hyperlinked to many raw materials, quoted texts, mostly from the Baha'i writings, pertinent to these various topics. And we'll be touching on several of these topics in the slides to come. And I won't say much about the inventory codes except that BH is Baha'u'llah, BB is the Bab, and AB is Abdu'l-Baha. So you'll see as we go along. So let me pause, and we can maybe go to grid mode, and maybe pause for a few questions at this moment, because it's going to get very detailed.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So far, very riveting. You have us sitting at the edge of our seats. So far, does anybody have any questions? If you do, please use the raise your hand feature. If not, we will have Dr. Phelps continue. Anybody? And I'm sure you will later, so it's okay.
Yeah, there'll be an opportunity later as well.
Okay, let's continue then, Dr. Phelps.
Okay, all right. Okay. Back to the screen. Okay. So I'm going to break all the rules of good presentations, which say never have more than 3 points. And I'm going to have like 15 points. So many of these may just kind of wash over, and maybe one of them will stick, maybe none of them will stick. But here are some themes in what we might call a Baha'i-inspired divine philosophy, a Baha'i-inspired cosmology, and that word not meant in the scientific sense, but in the sense of, here's an origin story, and here's a sort of big picture view of where it all comes from, where it's all going. And the first point is, and I won't be reading all of these quotations, or this will take way over an hour. So I'm going to kind of flip through a lot of these slides kind of quickly, not do justice to the quoted material. But I can make this slide presentation available to whoever's interested afterwards. So don't worry about missing it. So first of all, the universe has a single origin. Not a surprise. The Abdu'l-Baha says the origin of all material life is one, and its termination likewise one. He says in Paris Talks, consider the world of created beings, how varied and diverse they are in species, yet with one sole origin. And also in some answer questions, there's no doubt that initially there was a single origin. So there is a unity to the creation of things. That origin has been called in the Baha'i writings the primal will, which is a phrase we might not have heard before in other religious traditions, but it's an idea of the primal will is kind of a proxy for God in a way. It's a way of saying God without saying God, because you can't say that God created the universe, because that would implicate God in a creative act, which is in the end a limitation on the essence of God. The Baha'i faith, in this sense, it follows certain strains of strict transcendental monotheism of Islam and Christianity, certain schools which would say that God is so completely transcendent that that you can't even attribute to God any of the attributes that we can think of, that God is beyond and above all of those attributes. And among those attributes are the attribute of the creator, the attribute of the just, the attribute of oneness is an attribute of God, the attribute of existence. Does God even exist? Is existence even, to say that something exists, is that already to yank it out of some realm beyond existence and to sort of thrust it into the world as a form of limitation? So to avoid having to avoid saying or the possible danger of limiting God in some way, one way to think about the idea of the primal will is that it's a way of saying that the universe has a divine origin without linking it causally to God in his essence, God in its essence, because obviously it's beyond gender as well. So the Baha'i writings say that the primal will is this originating principle. Baha'u'llah says it, Abdu'l-Baha says it, the Bab says it, that by his wish, which is the primal will itself, all have stepped out of utter nothingness into the realm of being, the world of the visible. the Persian Bayan says that the relationship which exists between the primal will and the universe is as intimate and indissoluble as that which exists between fire and heat. Abdu'l-Baha, in one of his tablets, says it is the primal will which consists of the bounty of the rays of the sun, which is the cause of the manifestation and appearance of beings. And in Gleanings, Baha'u'llah says, a sprinkling from the unfathomed deep of his sovereign and all-pervasive will hath out of utter nothingness called into being a creation, which is infinite in its range and deathless in its duration. So it's a paradox of there being an origin, sort of out of nothingness, creation was called into being, but creation is also infinite in its range, deathless in its duration. So it's a creative act without a point in time, which seems a little bit odd, especially in physics. We could say, well, the creative act or the point in time can be pinpointed in physical cosmology at about 13.7 billion years ago. But the next immediate question is, well, did something come before that? Are there parallel universes being generated at the same time? There's no necessary reason to suppose that the physical origin point of our universe is necessarily the origin point of existence itself. That's still an open question. So the primal will is the originating principle. The third idea I'll bring about is really a correlating idea, which is this primal will, how it's defined in the Baha'i Writings, is known by many different names in different traditions. It's known as the Logos in the Gospel of John, in the beginning, where it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." That Word of God, which is the Logos, which is the command of God, is that middle tier of the ringstone symbol that most of us here are probably familiar with the three layers to it connected by that vertical line. The three layers representing that essence of the divine, which has no causal connection to the world, a little bit contrary to what the vertical line would suggest, but theologically that top layer is not causally connected to the world. It's the middle tier, which is that tier of the realm of command, or the realm of the primal will, or of the Logos, or of the Word of God, or in the case of Platonic philosophy, the demiurge. That's the creative agency in the Timaeus of Plato. The all-pervasive grace, the emanating grace, which can be thought of metaphorically as the rays of the sun, which emanate from the sun but are not the sun itself, and also the universal divine intellect, the mind, the first mind, which has been described by Baha'u'llah in his Tablet of Wisdom as God's will, the primal will, and identified with nature. So, and Abdu'l-Baha clarifies, all of this is identified with this middle tier, the creative principle, the middle tier of the ringstone symbol, which at the very bottom kind of neatly brings us back to the physical world with the identification of the primal will with nature. Abdu'l-Baha says all the conditions and perfections that the philosophers, i.e. the scientists, attribute to nature, he's talking about the natural philosophers, are the same as have been attributed to the primal will in the Holy Scriptures. So Abdu'l-Baha at the very bottom here is making a really essential clarification of terminology. There's all of these terms that's been used for the creative principle, primal will, Logos, and so forth. Abdu'l-Baha says, and Baha'u'llah first of all says in the Tablet of Wisdom, nature is God's will. He makes the identification, and Abdu'l-Baha clarifies, whatever the philosophers, the natural philosophers, the science people are saying, this is nature, this is the laws of physics, this is how we understand how the world, the universe works. In the Holy Scriptures, that's the will of God. So nature is God's working in the world. Very kind of simple formula. Here's a really interesting one, and this is the fourth point I would bring out, is that the primal will is self-generating. A really strange one, because, well, wasn't the primal will created by God? No, it couldn't have been created by the essence of God, because that would create a causal linkage. And the Bab says this, I think, even more clearly than Abdu'l-Baha does. And the Bab here is really citing a hadith of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq that says God created the will through his own self and created all things through the will. And the Bab basically echoes this hadith where he says that handiwork, the universe, is not, oh, sorry, that handiwork, the cause is his handiwork. So the handiwork of God being the primal will is not preceded by any cause, to such an extent that the tongue of his favored ones repeatedly addressed this absence of causation by the essence. And says also in one of his later works of the Bab that he hath created the will by itself out of nothing else. And in one of his commentaries, it says the cause that God created the will from nothing through itself, and then he created through it all that to which the name thing can be applied. The cause of its existence in truth is its own self and not else. So there's a kind of a circularity implied that the creative principle, the laws of physics, if you wish, are self-generative in a kind of circular way. That you can't look outside the causal nexus of this physical universe to some creator agency that brought it into being. Rather, it is this kind of a self-generative causal network. Sounds a little bit like some ideas in modern physics. Fifth idea is that this primal will, which we also know to be the laws of physics or the laws of nature, is the inner reality of things. Abdu'l-Baha says it beautifully, that the world of command is the station of the primal will, which is a universal reality that is resolved into infinite forms. It is the ocean of the will, which is the world of command. And he says it is in other tablets that this primal will, which is the realm of command, is the inner reality of all things. And he says in one of in one of his pilgrim talks, he says that the cosmic spirit, the divine primal will, unfolds within the creature just as the bud of a flower unfolds. It's a beautiful way of describing it also, because the bud of a flower unfolds in a way that's kind of pre-programmed, and he says it in a way also that almost as when you plant a seed and the fruit appears in its appointed time, and in a way that fruit was, the pattern of the fruit was there from the beginning in the seed. In a similar way, the pattern of the cosmos is there from the beginning. But we can understand that in physical terms as the laws of physics were there from the beginning, and they led almost inevitably to the emergence of life and consciousness. The next one is that love is the cause of creation. So the primal will is the cause of creation, but the primal will can be thought of as an emanation of love. Why use the word love when we think of love as a purely human emotion? Love, as used in the Baha'i writings, often has far more cosmic connotations than just human love between two people. The cosmic love is a love which is, more generally speaking, that attractive force between the elements in all its degrees. Abdu'l-Baha says this in his famous Lawh-e Mahabbat, or his tablet on love, which is also known perhaps better by its quotation in Selections from the Writings of Abdu'l-Baha, number 12, I believe, that love is the cause of God's revelation unto man, the vital bond inherent in accordance with the divine creation in the realities of things. Love is the most great law that ruleth this mighty and heavenly cycle, the unique power that bindeth together the diverse elements of this material world, the supreme magnetic force that directeth the movements of the spheres in the celestial realms. In other words, love is gravity at some level. It's electromagnetism. It's the strong and weak nuclear forces at some level. Perhaps love and strife, because some, two positive charges will repel each other. So you have that, you have the opposite force as well embedded within the laws of nature. And of course, Baha'u'llah in the Hidden Words says, I love thy creation, hence I created thee. Here we have that circularity again, which is appearing. That self-generation of the primal will is that love of God for creation, and creation coming to being and loving its creator in turn, which completes the circle. And that love is another way of talking about consciousness. Consciousness emerges, and the reflection of self-consciousness upon itself, which is the divine spark within, as Baha'u'llah says in the Hidden Words, turn thy sight unto thyself, that thou mayest find me standing within thee, is that circularity of this circle of existence of divine love, which is going to be overarching narrative framework that emerges from these slides. This creation that emerges through this act of love is infinite in time and space. Despite it being created from nothingness, that creation from nothingness is more of an ontological state. It's a state that doesn't take place at a particular moment in time, but it's something which is eternally ongoing and infinite in its range. Also consistent with, at least the infinite in its range is consistent with the universe as we observe it. It doesn't seem to have any limits. It is possible that the universe is actually infinite in volume. Of course, it's not infinite in time according to our concept of the Big Bang, but there may be other bangs. There may be parallel universes. There may be, a bang and a collapse and a bounce. All of these are still open questions for cosmology. And also, interestingly, Baha'u'llah, in perhaps where he goes into the most detail about the process of creation, he describes it as a kind of process of division and rotation. And here he's really echoing some words of the Timaeus of Plato, and echoing that narrative, that ancient narrative of the ancient Greeks, where you take something, he says it's a line, and you split it lengthwise in two, and you rotate one around the other, and from it you create the universe. And this is quoted in one of Baha'u'llah's tablets on alchemy, on the alchemical process, and it's a related concept of this division and really purification, rotation, ultimate union is a sort of thumbnail sketch of the alchemical process as Baha'u'llah describes it. And in one of his tablets, he goes into much greater detail about this division into two and then rotation. That division into two and rotation, as described in the Timaeus, looks very similar, where and we won't have time to go into the details of this, but I just added this slide so you can compare the two and see just how similar Baha'u'llah's description, his cosmological description, is to Plato's Timaeus. I think it's clear that he was at least paraphrasing the Timaeus. And those two things that the universe is divided into, we're on to point 9 now, can be thought of as the active force and its recipient. That's how Baha'u'llah describes it in a well-known passage in his Tablet of Wisdom. He says, the world of existence came into being through the heat generated from the interaction between the active force and that which is its recipient. These two are the same, yet they are different. He goes on and says a bit more, and Abdu'l-Baha also says a bit more about this, or the Bab says more about this, helpfully in one of his commentaries, in the Kaf and the Nun, the word be and it is, which is stated in the long obligatory prayer. When the Kaf, the B, the letters B and E being joined and knit together are the imperative commanding word, the word of the primal will, the word of the Logos, which brings creation to being, is God saying be, sort of breathing the command into the world. And that breath of the merciful, that emanative command, is comprised of two letters. Fortunately, in English translation, B and E, it's also two letters. In the original Arabic, it's Kaf and Nun, Kon. And the Kaf, the Bab says, is the stage of the will, the Mashiach, and the Nun is the stage of purpose, Erade. So the will and purpose joined and knit together. But he says a little bit more. He says Mashiach, the will, is the father of things, and Erade is the mother. So you have the male and female principle being sort of equal participants in this generative act, obviously biologically, as it is cosmologically. And then he goes even further and says, through the Kaf, God created the matter of all things, and through the Nun, God created the form of all things. So matter and form also being in ancient philosophical ideas, to those are the principal components of all things. There's some substance it's made out of, and then there's some form or shape that it assumes. The Kaf is that substance, whereas the Nun, the female principle, gives that substance shape. So they have said, and Abdu'l-Baha also talks about this in in his commentary on the Hidden Treasure, where he talks about the potentialities and recipients of the potentialities. Two different words, I think, to describe the same process of there being an agent and a patient principle, an active force and its recipient. It's different yet equal. Maybe there's a correlate for this in physics, mass and energy. They're the same yet they're different. E equals mc squared. They have an equivalence about them, but one is more the active force, and the other is more the recipient of that energy, the thing into which the shapes are made. This interaction between active force and its recipient brings into being the heat, generates the heat which underlies the motion which underlies the universe. I bring this about, it's kind of a detailed point, but I bring it about because it has such wonderful resonances with what we understand of the physical processes of the world. The sun gives forth its light and heat from this coming together of elements. The fusion of hydrogen elements, of hydrogen atoms, of protons really in the heart of the sun, and their fusion into helium atoms is what releases the tremendous energy that fuels the sun, that keeps it from collapsing, that causes its light that floods the universe, and that light of all the suns and galaxies that flood the universe is this process of heat that's generated from the coming together of things, which is an outcome of love at the most elemental level. The heat without which there would be no motion. It's the quintessence of the divine cosmic activity, Baha'u'llah says in one of his important early commentaries written during the Baghdad period. And he says also the cause of motion hath ever been heat, and the cause of heat is the word, back to the primal word, the primal will, the logos. By the heat appeared which God made to be the cause of motion in the universe, and everything is in the state of motion. So this generative heat, which releases all these potentialities into the world, create life, but they also create death, because life and death are two arcs of one circle. They are, according to divine philosophy, Abdu'l-Baha said in one of the talks he gave in the United States, Abdu'l-Baha said that according to divine philosophy, there are two important and universal conditions in the world of material phenomena, one which concerns life, the other concerning death, one relative to existence, the other non-existence, one manifest in composition, the other in decomposition. So the sort of the pillars of divine philosophy, as Abdu'l-Baha puts it, is this dance between composition and decomposition, between life and death, which is another version of that circle of existence that we're seeing kind of pop up in different ways. The loving creation that one might in turn be loved, and so forth. And this translates into the physical world as the web of life, with the eaters and the eaten. And as Abdu'l-Baha says, the very fabric of life is reared upon this fact. And were it not so, the ties that interlace all created things within the universe would be unraveled. He says the world of existence is constantly revolving through the changes of building up and tearing down. As by the will of God, the power of composition exists, also by the will of God, the power of decomposition exists. This web of life, of life and death, of composition and decomposition, is a fundamental feature of the universe, the interconnectedness of things that result from this. And it gives rise to what we might call an intrinsic oneness of the world of existence. Everything is so entangled with everything else that you can't move one bit of it without it having an effect somewhere else. This intrinsic oneness of the world of phenomena, Abdu'l-Baha says, is one of the abstruse subjects of divine philosophy. You get a sense that there's this whole coherent idea of divine philosophy that was in Abdu'l-Baha's head for sure, because he talks about it, but he only gives, he gives bits and pieces of it in flashes here and there in his different talks and tablets. And he's really left it up to us to try to take all the pieces and put them together into some coherent whole. And that's what one attempt at doing that is in these slides here. He said there's an essential oneness existing in all existing things. It is a subtle principle appertaining to divine philosophy and requiring close analysis and attention. And that means that ultimately there's but one reality and one essence expounded in the worlds of outer form, and at each of its stages is described by a specific name in accordance with the degrees of its particular manifestations on the plane of this limited world. This idea, of course, that all things is one is not, and most of the ideas that I'm listing here are not unique to the Baha'i writings, but you can find precedents for them in all sorts of both sacred and secular philosophies and theologies, going all the way back to, say, Heraclitus. Some of the earliest recorded human philosophizing by Heraclitus says, listening not to me, but to the account, kind of like the account of the Timaeus, it is wise to agree that all things are one. These essential relationships that bind everything together into a kind of a oneness is what Abdu'l-Baha, perhaps counterintuitively, says is the ultimate definition of religion, nature, and love. All of these receive the same definition by Abdu'l-Baha in different places. In Some Answered Questions, he talking about the powers and capacities of the prophets, of the manifestations of God, their awareness of things that enables them to say things which wouldn't occur to other people, things that are based upon and aligned with reality. He says religion consists in the necessary relationships deriving from the realities of things. And in a way, that's one way to understand the peculiar genius of the prophet, is that they have this intuition of the interrelationships that suffuse all things. And their description of those interrelationships is what we call divine revelation. And we take it as a given fact, whereas to them, they're simply describing what they intuit by way of the necessary relationships. But elsewhere in his tablet to Dr. Farrell, Abdu'l-Baha takes nature and he gives it exactly the same definition. By nature is meant those inherent properties and necessary relations derived from the realities of things. Perhaps we shouldn't be surprised in light of Baha'u'llah's declaration in his Tablet of Wisdom that nature and the primal will are the same thing. So we're describing two poles of one sphere. And when you rotate one pole, the other pole goes out of sight momentarily. And you can describe and see the world from the perspective of one pole, but you have to rotate that pole 180 degrees to get to the other side to see that complementary definition, which can never be kind of go on the same page as the other definition, just without creating a sense of tension or contradiction. Just like you can't spread out a map of the earth on a single sheet of paper without some tension or contradiction, without some warping or tearing of the sheet of the fabric of the surface of the planet to make that three-dimensional thing spread out into two dimensions. It can't be done without some form of distortion. Similarly, with these spiritual principles, they have these intrinsic poles which define these complementary ideas. And the idea of mind and matter is one of those complementary pairings. The idea of the primal will and the laws of nature is another complementary pairing. The idea of religion here and nature, complementary pairing. And underlying it all is this idea of love, which Baha'u'llah describes as that universal law, like a fountain ever flowing and constantly being replenishing and never changing, which Abdu'l-Baha says here is the cause of God's revelation unto man, the vital bond inherent in accordance with the divine creation in the realities of things. So I've mentioned many times that these principles call to mind an image of a circle of existence, an emanative arc and a returning arc, a spoken word and that spoken response, yea, verily, that completes the circle. The love of God for creation, the love of creation for God, life and death. These things are all generative of this idea of a circle of existence. And Abdu'l-Baha puts it in one of the later chapters of Some Answered Questions as being kind of the central idea. He says, those who have thoroughly investigated the questions of divinity know of a certainty that the material worlds terminate at the end of the arc of descent, that the station of man lies at the end of the arc of descent and the beginning of the arc of ascent, which is opposite the supreme center, and that from the beginning to the end of the arc of ascent, the degrees of progress are of a spiritual nature. The arc of descent ends in material realities, and the arc of ascent in spiritual realities. So that's how he puts it. That's, I think, the kind of ground zero for this entire talk is this chapter of Some Answer Questions, and in particular, this paragraph of Some Answer Questions. That's the imagery. That's the new narrative, I think, this narrative of the circle of existence, which is both a narrative of the physical creation and processes of the universe, but it also includes that complementary narrative of life and consciousness, which is so absent in the purely physical and materialistic narrative of modern cosmology. Abdu'l-Baha puts it in one of his talks. He says, the creation, the emanated, is the descending curve of the logos, the breath of life of God. And the development or evolution is the ascending curve. This curve is, however, nothing else than the coming back or returning of all things to God, be it for destruction or for absolute perfection. So, and then the final, and so we have many images of this circle of existence. This is one from an early pilgrim note, one of the first ones that has come down to us from, I think, 1899. Whoops. And we're losing, here we go. And this is available online. It's from a drawing purportedly by Abdu'l-Baha, but reproduced by Lua and Edward Getzinger. And we have the imagery here of the arc of descent going down on the left with its various degrees of the mineral, the vegetable, the animal kingdom. The human kingdom here at the bottom is the sort of key inflection point of the whole creative circle, because it's with the emergence of human reality that you have free will. And you have this passage of the law of the universe, in a way, proceeding from the law of necessity, of mathematical laws of nature, kind of forcing things along in a way that can't be contested, to the ascending arc, which is the arc of spiritual progress. Here on this planet, human beings, maybe on other planets in the universe where there's other conscious beings, their own similar arcs. We don't know the answer to that yet, but the universe is big enough that it's likely to be the case. And this, the progression of the spiritual, of the arc of ascent, is not following the law of coercion, but more the law of persuasion, or the law of invitation, one way of thinking about it. Alfred North Whitehead, I think, hit upon this idea where he says, and he actually attributes it originally to Plato. At the end of his life, he had this idea that the divine element in the world is to be conceived as a persuasive agency and not as a coercive agency, should be looked upon as one of the greatest intellectual discoveries in the history of religion. I agree with him on that. And I think that what he has essentially sort of sketched out here is this idea of an arc of descent in which the law of coercion, the mathematical laws of physics are dominant, and then the arc of ascent, which is the law of persuasion, which is our own free will ascending the degrees back to the origin point. Nader Saidi, in his book Logos and Civilization, talks about the arcs of ascent and descent. He breaks them out suggestively into 7 degrees for each. And the 7 descending degrees are from numerous tablets of the Bab and Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha, some of which he quotes and refers to in Logos and Civilization. And he suggestively puts the 7 valleys onto the arcs of ascent, although, as we know, Baha'u'llah describes spiritual degrees in more than one way. So the 7 valleys is just one way of thinking about spiritual degrees in an ascending arc, complementary to the arc of descent. The idea of an arc of ascent and descent, of a circle of existence that's somehow self-generative, goes back a very, very long way. It's visible in other ancient cultures. This is actually from an ancient alchemical manuscript of the 3rd century AD, the earliest one that survives. And it sure looks like the arcs of ascent and descent to me. It says all is one in the center. The Ouroboros of the snake swallowing its tail is an important idea. It suggests this dynamic equivalence of origin and end, of mind generating matter, which in turn generates mind, and of continual transformation. The interplay of life and death is summarized there. The imagery of the Ouroboros present here in the tomb of Tutankhamun. You can see the snake swallowing his tail at the very top. It's available in Hindu cosmology, the earth supported by a tortoise, a quarter elephant, and the quarter elephant surrounded by a naga, which is also swallowing its tail. This is more of a modern picture. This is from a medieval manuscript in Norse mythology, also of a serpent. It's not exactly a circle, but it's kind of swallowing its tail. According to the Prose Edda, Odin threw Jormungandr into the great ocean and then circles the world. He grew so large that he surrounded Earth, grasping his own tail. It was said that if the world serpent were to release its tail, Ragnarok, the end of the world, would begin. So surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, this imagery ends up making an appearance in a variety of world mythologies. It also makes a very suggestive appearance in some of the headier and more speculative ideas of some of the great theoretical physicists of the last century. This one being John Archibald Wheeler, who was my privilege to meet when I was at Princeton. He was in his final years there and would come to the gravity group lectures that I helped organize for a few years. He had this idea of the cause of the participatory universe, that somehow quantum mechanically, our observations of distant past events were in some way generative of those events. That, as we know from the laws of quantum mechanics, a system remains in a state of indeterminacy until it's observed. How it's observed, what does it mean to say it's observed? Who gets to do the observing? This is still an open question, hotly debated today in scientific circles. There are some who would still say the observation needs to be done by a conscious agency. But if that's the case, who gets to be the conscious agency? Can snails do the observing? Can rocks do the observing? I mean, where do you draw the line between what gets to observe? Putting that question aside for the moment, Wheeler's idea was that us, the big eyeball here on the left of the U, which stands for universe, is observing the origin point of the universe. And we can do that by looking far, far out into the universe, observing, for example, gravitationally lensed quasars. The James Webb Telescope right now is observing these ancient galaxies that go back just a few 100 million years after the Big Bang. Our act of observing those galaxies, gravitationally lensed by nearer clusters of galaxies, in a way, quantum mechanically determines the path that those light rays took around the intervening galaxies. There's a way in which our observations can be thought of as determinative of some reality that took place billions of years in the past. He took that idea and extrapolated it all the way back to the Big Bang. He said, maybe our being a part of the universe and observing it is part of how the universe itself comes into being from a cosmological standpoint. This is really the Ouroboros, but it's a modern version of the Ouroboros. It is mind and matter being generative of each other. Mind and matter being in some way dependent upon the observer. The comprehension of our universe in so many ways is dependent on our position. And this is the last point, this sort of last, plank in a Baha'i divine philosophy that I'll bring out today. And you can think of this as a further explication of this idea of the relativity of religious truth, which is that the mystic path, as you progress from stage to stage, the way you see the world is fundamentally different between one stage and the next. And Abdu'l-Baha says that this is a feature, not a bug, of the human experience, and that the cause of disunity in the world is when we don't recognize that different people at different stages in the evolution of their consciousness will see the world differently. Some will see the world through a lens which is much more analytical, which breaks things into the pieces, and that's how they understand it. Other people will see the world much more synthetically, which will see the world much more intuitively, as looking at and finding the connections between things. These are complementary ways of looking at the world. Baha'u'llah in the Seven Valleys calls them the valleys of distinction and the valleys of unity. And between the valleys of distinction and the valleys of unity, there can be profound disagreement on fundamental questions of theology and so forth. But Baha'u'llah wants to validate each of these points of view within their own sphere. So, for example, and Abdu'l-Baha as well, he says, although that which is contemplated is but one, The perspectives and stations of the mystics differ. Each viewpoint, however, is complete and perfect with respect to the station and degree occupied by the viewer. So this is really a profound idea that has to be included. Also may have something to do with the principle of relativity in the physical domain, the principle of relativity in the spiritual or mystical domain may have its analog in the principle of relativity in the physical domain. So this is summarizing the 15 points, and I won't reread them, but I'll just sort of leave them up here. I color-coded them because some of them I think have plausible physical analogs. You can think of this as describing some spiritual truth, but you can think of it almost equally as describing something that we know about the physical universe. The ones I put in orange are, I think, suggest missing elements in the present picture, in the present materialist picture of the universe. Of course, the idea that love is the cause of creation, that life and death are universal conditions. Modern cosmology really does well with the death part, the entropy part, but it doesn't recognize the existence of something complementary to entropy, which also acts at a global scale, not something which is visible in a particle accelerator, not something which is describable as a mathematical force or interaction between things, but something which nevertheless emerges as matter acts in the aggregate, just like entropy. As matter acts in the aggregate, disorder tends to increase. But it seems, just looking at the history of our planet, that something else is at work that tends towards the upbuilding of matter, that tends towards the emergence of consciousness. Is this a principle of the universe that has yet to be identified, which complements this principle of entropy? That, I think, suggests a gap in our current understanding of the universe. And once that gap is filled, then we see that existence is really the circle that is comprised of these arcs of ascent and descent. And so that is what I would propose is this new likely narrative, that its starting point is really what we directly observe as residents of this planet, that everything is really life and death, the dance of the elements and of things coming into being and going out of existence. That mind and consciousness is somehow both the origin and the destination. It's something that emerges from matter acting over billions of years, just as the evolutionary biologists are describing through evolutionary processes and through evolutionary pressures. At the same time, at the end of it, mind somehow gives rise to matter through processes not yet understood, but which completes that circle. Processes, of course, not yet understood, but for which there are many speculative ideas, such as those of John Archibald Wheeler. So, the picture then that we started with of this collective childhood of ancient cosmologies, where we naively thought of ourselves as the center of things, but now that we know better, we realize that there is no purpose and that humans are incidental. It now maybe gets somewhat expanded, and we understand that where we are now, that is this idea of the purposeless universe, the picture of modern science, is not so much the maturity of the human race, but its adolescence. That we're passing through adolescence on the way to maturity. And the adolescent stage is characterized by this tearing down of the certainties of the past. And that's a good thing. We want to tear down the certainties and superstitions of the past. We want to replace it with something which is, which actually follows the actual laws of the universe as we've come to understand and discover them. It's in this adolescent period, the period of the Enlightenment, that we discover that the universe follows mathematical laws. This is a piece of our picture of the cosmos, which wasn't there in ancient times. But as we pass from adolescence to maturity, we keep that piece. We keep that idea of the universe operates according to laws which can be discovered and which can, in many cases, be written out in mathematical form. But we recover the idea of consciousness, centeredness, and purposiveness. There is room in the observed physical universe for consciousness and purpose, and that's one of the major points I want to leave you with. And just finally, to wrap up with a suggestive idea, the idea that there's kind of three stages. There's a stage of there's a pre-maturity stage. There's a simple stage which one might call our collective childhood. One might call it naive. But as Ariel and Will Durant suggest, they say in religion, the mature mind has passed through three stages: belief, unbelief, and understanding. And I like how they've swapped. You might think, well, why doesn't unbelief come first and then belief and then understanding? And I think the key insight here is that belief precedes unbelief. And by belief, they're really talking about the simplistic, non-interrogatory belief of our forebears being replaced by this hard, scientific, these are the facts of things. And we no longer believe. We have unbelief in all of these ancient cosmologies. But beyond that is another stage, a stage of understanding. One way to think of this is in terms of the monomyth, sometimes called the hero's journey, popularized by Joseph Campbell, and seen on the screen of just about every action movie, most movies that Hollywood produces. It's something that is almost a universal constant in the human spiritual journey, that you begin with this call to adventure in the village, so to speak, where all of the hierarchies are defined for you. Your reality is defined for you. It's something that's been given to you. But to ascend, to sort of traverse this circle of existence, which is arcs of ascent and descent, one has to pass out of the comfort of one's given surroundings into the underworld. And it's in that underworld, the stage 2, where one passes through the darkness, through the abyss, where everything that one thought one knew is dissolved. One passes from belief to unbelief, to use Ariel and Will Durant's imagery, phrasing. But on the other side of that unbelief, one returns after the journey, after the spiritual transformation that takes place. One returns to the village, outwardly the same, but inwardly completely transformed. One understands now both the stages of belief and unbelief. One is ascended to the stage of understanding. But how you even describe these stages, these spiritual stages, is a function. It's a subjective thing. How you label the stages is subjective. So viewed from the first stage, before you leave the village, you're among the believers. And those who have descended into the underworld, they no longer believe these things. Well, those are the unbelievers. And beyond them, maybe the heretics. I mean, you can't even figure out where they're coming from. But if you're viewing things from the second stage, you're in this sort of realm of everything's been dissolved and I no longer have any foundations of belief. Well, we're the ones who really understand. Maybe we're the academics. Maybe we're the educated ones. And those others, well, those are the simpletons. Those are the ones who don't understand. Those are the ones who haven't really thought it through. And then the people in the next stage beyond, well, they must be confused because they're saying things we don't understand either. But viewed from stage 3, you see it. You take the same stages, but you label them differently. The first are simply the childhood of our understanding. The second stage is the adolescence, and the third is maturity. But really beyond that, they're all wayfarers on the road. Everyone is wayfaring. Everyone is path walking a spiritual path. And in that sense, everyone's spiritual experiences can be validated within the perspective of that spiritual path. That's where a universal narrative has to go, I think. It has to be something which validates the perspectives of all the life stages. It has to validate the perspective of those who see the sort of mind first, spirit first narrative. God creates the universe, the heavens and the earth, sends the prophets for our edification and instruction. That's the sort of centering of one narrative lens. Another narrative lens, it sees matter first. Your universe came about through a spontaneous moment and subsequently evolved through mathematical laws with entropy increasing at every stage. Both of these can be true. Both of these can be simultaneously true. Particularly if we see through a third narrative lens in which mind and matter are co-emergent in our universe. But for this to take place, the narrative has to have the capacity for multiple interpretations. It has to be something inclusive rather than exclusive. It can't be a circle that we use to draw and to define other people as being outside of, and us special people as being inside of. Professor Bushry, who much beloved, I think, of many of us, and so influential for many of us, who was the first chair of Baha'i Studies at the University of Maryland, was fond of quoting what ended up, I just discovered, being the poet laureate of Oregon, my home state, Edward Markham, as saying, "He drew a circle that shut me out, heretic, a rebel, a thing to flout, but love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in." And I think that really has to be our I'm going to skip these because I think I've just gone on too long. That has to be where we go with this narrative. It can't be something that shuts out, that divides and polarizes. It has to be something that embraces and that sees the different perspectives, spiritual perspectives, intuitive perspectives, analytic perspectives, more material perspectives, as being valid ways of seeing the world. And the new narrative then is not something in the sense of some separate system of knowledge that we're bringing. It's not something that informs. It's more something that inspires. It generates the heat and the motion, in one of these planks of divine philosophy. It catalyzes the unfoldment of the potentialities of creation and of the advance of consciousness. It's something that increases love and goodwill between peoples of all races and nations. And it puts the ascent of consciousness, both individually and collectively, as central to the processes of the universe and not peripheral or accidental. It renders the impossible possible, especially in the social sphere. So much of what seems impossible today, bringing people together across seemingly unbridgeable divides, that's the job of a new sacred narrative. It lights a fire and invites us into the mystery which can only be feebly captured by these sorts of narratives and images. And of course, I'm not talking in the end, I'm not just talking about cosmologies old and new. I'm talking about religious modes of thinking in general, about the modern secular mindset, traditional modes of thinking, and what might lie beyond both. So thank you for sitting through that. That went over, I think, a lot longer than I wanted it to. But I guess at this point, we can open it up for questions and reactions.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anybody have any question or comment? I'll give you a few seconds to go ahead and try to use your raise your hand feature. Okay, perfect. Kirk, if you could just go ahead and unmute yourself. And let me just do a side-by-side with Dr. Phelps to make it simpler, please.
Hello, Stephen. Hello, Pa.
Hi, Kirk. Hello, Pa.
I am so happy to hear the words adolescence come out of your mouth. That is the most important thing. You said so many important things today, but that is the vital one. We have got to understand that the Baha'i faith itself is in its adolescence. This is not something for the outside world. We are all inside that circle in different ways. And in the chat, I suggest I'd like to consult with you later about some great concerns I have about the lack of our carefully raised Baha'i youth not joining the faith. And I think what you've said today, even though it's been on a cosmological level, addresses that very well, because we cannot be coercive. We must convince. We have to.
That's right.
And so that's the key message for me is, and we have to really look at our Baha'i law, as we've been calling it all these years, which has really been the guardian, and decide just how much of that is real. I mean, that's one of the benefits of your putting together that subject heading list, is that we really need to get a comprehensive grip on our own writings, and we need to know what it really says and what it doesn't say. And we've got to be very careful, because otherwise we're going to be excluding a lot of people who are going to walk away from us, like our own children, our own carefully raised Baha'i children.
Yeah. Thanks, Kirk, for your thoughts.
Yes, thank you. We go to Tom. Tom, if you can please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you for combining science and art, Steve. This was wonderful. My question pertains to Native American cosmology. Recognize that all things try to be a circle. The planets, the tubular trunks of trees, whirlpools, snails. So they built their villages in circles, and they built their homes in circles, trying to grasp better this circle of existence. Modern man, especially what we call modern civilization, has decided to build things in squares and rectangles. We spend all day talking to rectangles. And so how are we preventing ourselves from grasping the circle of existence and the arcs of ascent and descent by our habits, in the same way that we still speak of sunrises and sunsets and reflect a pre-Copernican view of the universe? So what can we do as individuals to better grasp this circle of existence?
Oh, great question. Well, you mentioned the arts, and I think that's one of the best ways of doing it. I mean, so many expressions of the arts and of music, give us a more powerful, intuitive grasp of that. I'm reminded of Kevin Locke's hoop dance as a fantastic, for those of us who've seen it live, it's an unforgettable experience to see that, starting with that cosmological idea of the circle of existence, and then transforming it into this beautiful dance with all these hoops. I don't think it's. I think this is where my sort of the route that I'm moving in may not be the best route. I mean, and by that I'm saying, I mean that I'm going about this in a very intellectual way. I'm sort of crunching a lot of quotes, and I'm trying to analyze, and here's some pieces of a structure. And so, my approach in this presentation has been extremely analytic, and I think there may be much more intuitive, synthetic approaches that would give people that would, from which people would walk away with a better sense of that circle of existence than I try to express, in kind of logical terms.
Well, you did it wonderfully, and this is not a criticism of what you did, nor should you self-criticize. I'm just wondering, how we can better as individuals grasp this concept and play it out in our lives.
Yeah. Live the life, live the life, live the life. Yeah, what Abdu'l-Haq gave the formula, and I think it's a Star of the West, but that's kind of it. It's like it all comes down to love. In the end, it's that one thing, which is the law of love, which is between human hearts, but also between human beings and our environment. Between us and a beautiful sunset, and all of the the physical things of the world, as well as others. Being able to see in the other not just a member of the same species and trying to find some point of unity, and that while we're on this planet together, we need to sort of cooperate, which may be the extent of what you can do from a secular worldview, but to see more profoundly what Baha'u'llah invites us to see in the hidden words, that divine spark which is within every soul. That's ultimately the point of unity that that completes the circle of existence that we should find a way to focus on. But again, it's maybe easy to state in words, but that's the hardest thing. But again, that's the whole spiritual path in a nutshell. Moving from self to other, moving from the particular to the universal. I mean, Plato got it right 2,500 years ago, and the ascending the ladder of love is starting with love for individual things, individual bodies, individual creatures, but then ascending step by step until that love becomes more and more universal, until it embraces everything. And that's the completion of the arc of ascent. That's the thing that makes that circle of existence complete.
Thank you, Tom. Ruha, please.
This is Lee with Ruha. Thank you, Steve. I wanted to really emphasize my thanks for the presentation, because I've been very interested in this whole topic for quite a long time and struggling with it until some elements of this afternoon's presentation, especially the comments, brief as they might have been, about observer dependency and how important that is. In thinking about the quotation that you shared with Ariel and Will Durant about belief and then unbelief leading to understanding. I was thinking about the current unbelief that I've observed within science, and in particular, various forms of atheism, and overcoming those challenges. This made a lot of sense to me, and I also wanted to share a quote that I don't think I saw in the slides from Abdu'l-Baha, from the work that was compiled by Isabel Chamberlain on divine philosophy. Abdu'l-Baha said, "A man who has no knowledge of the heavenly universe has missed a portion of his heritage and is like unto a stone which knows nothing of humanity." I was reminded of that quote when various sections of your presentation were made today. And I thank you so much for sharing all that you did. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're going to go to, I think, because I do have some comments in the chat. Afshin, are you ready now for your question, or do you want me to go to someone else?
No, I'm here.
Okay, yeah, then please go ahead and ask your question. I just have to find you.
No worries.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Steve. That was great. I had a couple of questions. Two questions. The second one has three parts to it. Since the presentation was mostly, intellectual, and that's the reason I'm asking. So I'm not going by faith. I'm trying to go with, more evidence-based. So the first one is, I'm just asking your opinion. You had it in your slides, but you actually glanced over the quote of Abdu'l-Baha. So do you think he is referring to multiverse in the quote that he says, God exalted be, he fashioned 100,000 lamps, right?
Yeah, and God knoweth what is in the other lamps.
Exactly.
I love that quote. Yeah. It sounds like the multiverse to me.
Yeah. And he says, everything from the throne, earth, heaven, hell, everything is in one lamp.
Yeah.
So do you
That's
think
a fantastic quote?
Yeah,
I think, I think there's always a danger in taking what one regards as scripture and then trying to overlay it onto the physical world. That everyone has tried that in the past with, let's say, mixed results. And I think we should learn from that, from the mixed results of the past, finding intelligent design theory is one example of, trying to read too literally one's scriptures and being too quick to say, oh, this maps onto this thing in the physical world. And I may have committed a bit of the same error myself, suggesting the active force in its recipient may be matter and energy, but these are just meant as like half serious suggestions. And we can't avoid the temptation to read out from scripture things pertaining to the physical world. But I would just always signal caution with that and say that these things can usually only be read in hindsight.
Yeah.
But that being said, that quote about the lamp, which is so evocative of the verse of light in the Quran, which is so gorgeous, and which seems to indicate that this whole universe is just one lamp and there's infinite other lamps. It's it resonates very nicely with the sort of modern speculation about a multiverse. But there's lots of different kinds of multiverses. Max Tegmark in The Mathematical Universe elucidates 4 different multiverses, from just a universe big enough to include everything, all possibilities, to a kind of quantum mechanical multiverse, which is generated by the collapse of the wave function in all different ways, to even more to the frothy, foamy, bubbly, multiverse of inflation theory that suggests that you might have parallel bubbles in some larger dimensional framework, which is kind of the Abdu'l-Baha quote. But then there's a 4th multiverse, which is the multiverse of all mathematically consistent possibilities, which I like the most, actually. I think that's the most interesting possibility because because that's a real sort of, I think that the fullest expression of the principle of plenitude, first due to the ancient Greeks again, so much we owe to the ancient Greeks, but also reappearing in a lot of theology, including the Baha'i faith, including Abdu'l-Baha, who basically says God is infinitely generative and infinitely creative, and so all possibilities exist. Otherwise, God wouldn't be infinitely generative. But that would include more than just bubble universes. That would include all mathematically consistent possible formulations.
Yeah.
I find that a super sexy idea.
Yeah.
But who knows which, if any, of these four multiverses correlates with reality. A problem with all of these multiverses is that there is precisely zero data to affirm or disconfirm any of them.
Yeah, thank you so much. The second question I had was regarding the arc of ascent and descent. First of all, I don't think, or it doesn't appear that it is a full circle, like a real circle, right? The arc of descent appears to be a little bit smaller or shorter, and the arc of ascend, I said it the other ways. Descent is shorter. Ascend doesn't go to the same place, or it does, I don't know. It's just like a lot longer because it goes to infinity. If it wasn't like that, right, if we are recycling the same thing, that kind of proves a reincarnation, which we know in Baha'i faith that's not true. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, Abdu'l-Baha does say in one of his quotes that it's a circle, but then he says more precisely it's an elliptic curve. So yeah, it could be an ellipse. I think the main point is that there's something descending and there's something ascending, and it's descending from and ascending to more or less the same point, which is the primal will, which is the unreachable infinite. It's infinitely far away. So yeah, the circle is already a bad image because you can kind of go around a circle in a finite amount of time, but these arcs of ascent and descent are proceeding from and heading towards a point that is infinitely far away. So I think you've rightly pointed up the ultimate inability of any model to be an accurate sort of picture of the universe as it is. Everything is going to be suggestive. Hopefully the circle of existence is suggestive. I like it because it appears everywhere. It's like almost all cultures share it. And even most cultures have this idea of the Ouroboros, the snake swallowing its tail. So it's like, it's a likely narrative, it's a likely story, just like Plato says in the Timaeus. And it's one that has a chance at near universal resonance.
Mm-hmm.
Right, thank you so much, Afshin. Okay, we're going to go to Sandra, please. And please unmute yourself, Sandra.
Sorry, I'm really new to this technology. Well, one thing I would like to know the author of the quote about love and I do a circle to close them in. I don't know where I got that, but I've had that in my brain for so many years, and I never knew where it came from. So could you tell me?
Isn't it gorgeous? Yeah, so it was discovered by Sohail Bushri, as far as I know. Sohail Bushri used it all the time in his, I'm going to stick it in the chat here. And yeah, he was the poet laureate of Oregon, so I get to claim him as my own, I guess, being a proud Oregon native, part native. There's the quote, and here is the details of the poet. And I can't replicate the way Professor Bushri would say it. He said it with such panache.
I heard it or read it many, many years before I found the Baha'i faith.
Oh, wonderful.
Stuck in my brain all this time.
Yep.
Actually, another thing I wanted to say, which the conversation has kind of moved beyond, but to me, the concept, and I'm not at all a scholar, but the concept of like ecology and the interrelatedness and the interdependency of it that's becoming more and more known is a way to proceed towards this concept of love being the cause of the universe, because it's very similar
Very much.
in my mind.
Very much. Yeah. I think this idea, I think this whole network, this constellation of ideas, if I could use a cosmological phrase, one of the things I think that I like about it is that it goes well beyond human beings. It's not just human centric. It doesn't stop at, well, love each other and then that's it. It's actually our idea of love has to expand beyond our neighbor to include all creation, and all creation is the plants and animals and the very surface of the earth we live on, as well as all the peoples and tribes that live on that other continent on the other side of the planet, as well as ultimately the whole universe. And that sort of boundless love that we're supposed to be generating is not a species dependent love. But in the end, we can also say it better, even if we think that species dependent love is the highest love, we still had better figure out how to preserve our environment for our own sake. So it's even for selfish reasons, we ought to start worrying a bit more about the plants and animals and our environment and so forth. So whether or not we're motivated by species self-interest or by the more mystical sort of boundless love that we're called to, I think they both lead to the same place of we need to be better stewards of our environment and see ourselves more as part of this grand ecosystem, and we're only part of that.
Thank you so much, Sandra, for your question. David, please.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Stephen. That was wonderful. I would say, like, yeah, not to damage your humility, but I think like your talks have been an important part of my own discovery. Like, I think along with Hooper Dunbar, along with John Hacker, kind of shedding light on all these different aspects in a different way. But like when you were talking about this new narrative, because I'm also preparing, I have to give a talk to part of the talk to an interreligious gathering of people of all religions, and we're supposed to talk about the timeless question of the purpose of suffering. Of course, doing that in 10 to 15 minutes is quite challenging. So it's like, what do you say to people in 10 or 15 minutes that you want them to hear the most? And, and of course, this thing about the new narrative came to my mind. And also kind of tying that in with what Hatcher talked about in the purpose of physical reality of salvation in motion, which is kind of thing. Because to me, the thing has always been the biggest setback to us getting along is this idea of the saved and the unsaved, that we're all kind of genetically or creationally based saved, in the sense that saved is a matter of perspective. It's a matter of how, this new narrative, it's how you view yourself, and then this is where, I think about the near-death experiences, like judgment isn't so much the creator judging you, it's you judging yourselves, judging your own reactions to other things, judging people's reactions to you. It's all a matter of perspective. So yeah, I just wanted, this has helped kind of crystallize that in my head, what to talk about in 10 to 15 minutes. But I always like to hear these things and then say, how can I use this to help myself and help other people? So.
Well, I hope there's raw materials in here that are useful for you.
And also the quote by Carl Sagan, like that was interesting to me too, because I was recently watching a near-death experience where it was, and this person's near-death experience was about the creator creating creation so that he could not only be known, but that like creating humans was a way that he could understand creation from within, because as the creator, he couldn't, because he's the creator. So this is interesting when it says the cosmos, or, creation is a way of the cosmos understanding
itself. Yeah.
So in the same way, we see that in the writings about I wanted to be known, I created thee, but it's an interesting subject that we as created beings and having the divine spark and that divineness really in our DNA, that the creator can use this in our experience to understand, so he can understand his creation. Not he's
Yes.
unknowable and whatnot, but
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. In a way, we are the, in the end, we are the creator knowing its own creation. I mean, not to blow up our own egos, but
Yeah.
we are the incarnation of the primal will knowing itself. We're that divine process. We're the peak of that divine process. I mean, more precisely, we would say that the prophet is like the real sort of arrowhead of the process of consciousness, and we're just behind them. But and all of us are, collectively that self, I don't know, that self-realization of the primal will is what we are. Abdu'l-Baha puts it in his one of his commentaries, that he says that he quotes a fragment of poetry of one of the Sufi mystics who says, "The sea hath ever been the sea, and all contingent things its waves and forms." And Abdu'l-Baha says that sea is the sea of the primal will, and we are the waves and forms on the surface of that ocean. And that's one way to think about our reality, which is, which elevates it in a way. But then, of course, the converse of that elevation of our reality is the humility that we have to have. I was just at an Ash Wednesday service a couple of days ago for the school that my daughters go to, and they had this beautiful imagery. They said we are dust and we are stardust at the same time. And they said we're dust in the sense that we all come from dust and we all return to dust, and that's why none of us should exalt ourselves over the other. And that's symbolic in that the Ash Wednesday ritual of putting the cross of ashes on your forehead. But at the same time, we're stardust. We are part of the divine. We have that divine spark within us, and so you get out of that imagery of dust both a need for humility and that sense of innate nobility, which I think has to be balanced.
Thank you so much. Sheila, if you can go ahead and unmute yourself, and let's see if you can start your video, that would be great, because then I can do a side-by-side, please. Go ahead.
Start my video? Don't think I know what you mean.
Okay, go ahead and ask your question, please.
Oh, all right. Thank you, Dr. Phillips. I've seen you before, and your talks are magnificent. I'm such a big fan of you don't want to see a big fan of cosmology and so on for such a long time, and the way you've combined your spiritual nature with your position as a scientist is the most magnificent thing, and I want to thank you for that and all your hard work in putting this presentation together, because we are the ones that are going to benefit from your hard work and your research. And I've downloaded, thank you, Native, for doing that, and I've downloaded it onto my computer. I just hope I can pull it back up again. But I could be very mistaken, but it seems like most physicists these days just talk about the Big Bang. 13.7 billion years ago, there was like this one big bang, and that's it, and I don't ascribe to that belief myself. I don't have a scientific background, even though I'm so very interested in it all. But I just think it's an infinite thing. I think it's infinite. Okay, there was this big bang 13.7 billion years ago, but okay, so then it gets all recreated again. Why not over and over and over again? Like a black hole, it goes back into this black hole and then it gets recreated again and again. So, but they seem to just ascribe to this one idea that there's just this one big bang and that's it. Do you agree with that, or am I wrong?
No one likes that. I mean, no, I don't think any practicing cosmologist likes it either, because it takes the universe as a brute fact that simply has to be accepted, and it signals a sort of endpoint of all possible descriptive frameworks. And nobody wants science to end with, oh, there was a big bang and it gave rise to this universe with three spatial and one time dimension, and the gravitational constant like this, and the quarks and the leptons being of these masses, and all of these facts that you have to take as given, because there's a whole like constellation of facts that have to be given, and it's like you would much rather have a scientific explanatory framework, which when you reach the end of it, to paraphrase John Wheeler, you would exclaim, "Oh, how could it have been otherwise?" And we're not there yet. We're still at a universe where it just seems like it has all sorts of bells and whistles to it, all sorts of complexities to it that didn't have to be there. And there's only a few ways to understand that. You either, well, take it as given, that's the way it is, sorry, which is really unconvincing and unsatisfying. Or you say, well, God created it that way so that we could know and love God. And that's satisfying to some, but not to others, because to them, you're just pushing the question back one level. So now you have to ask, well, where did God come from, who has all these thoughts and desires and so forth? And so you're not really answering the question. You're just kicking the can down the road. And the third possibility, which I love, which gets to this Max Tegmark's level 4 multiverse, is that, well, every possibility actually is. And we happen to be living in one particular instance of a universe that naturally gives rise to questioning beings. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here to ask the questions. But it would imply that there is an infinitude of parallel universes out there. Maybe some of them sterile, no life in them, no consciousness in them. Maybe it takes life and consciousness to create a universe. That would be another possibility. But still, you could have an infinite number of parallel universes, all with their own unique forms of life and consciousness, all asking the same question. I like that more. It's equally as metaphysical as the current Big Bang theory, or as theological as the as the idea that God just created the universe in however many days, and we just take it as a fact. But we're definitely off the map of science and well into the terrain of metaphysics, and we can all talk about our favorite theories and stick with the one that works for us, which was one of the main points I made earlier on in my presentation, and that is, as long as your theory of the universe is not like directly contradicting the facts of the universe, which is a pretty limited subset, we have to admit, then the next criterion is, well, does it work? And you also might say, well, is it the simplest possible, but using something called Occam's razor? But maybe Occam's razor is a principle you can use, or maybe not. Max Tegmark's level 4 universe violates Occam's razor all sorts of ways. But and so that's not the simplest universe. It's actually, it's a universe full of junk. But you're left then asking the question, well, why do we believe something and not something else when it's consistent with the facts? And that's where I think Baha'u'llah's insight about the nature of religion is so powerful to me, where he says religion is a kind of remedy for the illness of the age. And the prophet has this preternatural ability to see the interconnectedness, to see where things are going, and to dispense a remedy. And we follow that remedy with faith, but not blind faith, because we follow it because it works. We follow it because it's producing something in the world. And what is the Baha'i faith producing in the world? The only, not the only, but one of the few groups of truly universal human beings on the planet that are united by common goals. It's such a rare and precious thing. And the fact that Baha'is have been able to create that in such a short period of time, and that it really covers every corner of the globe, is, for me, the evidence. It's not what Baha'u'llah says I can prove that this is truth. I can say, well, this touches me, or I feel that this is true. But until it's implemented and you see the result of it, that's in the end all you really have to go with is this an effective remedy? Are we actually a model of the unity that we want to see in the world?
That's a good question, isn't it? Can
Yeah.
I ask you one more a silly question? which you might think is silly, I don't know.
Sure.
Do you believe that in alien life and well, I believe that there's life everywhere in the universe. That's my personal belief. But
Oh,
do
I
you have
think there has to be, yeah. Well, I think this idea of plenitude is that the universe wants to be alive, you know? Why? Because consciousness is generative. And in the end, maybe consciousness is creative of the universe itself. I think that's a plausible way of thinking. If that's the case, then life ought to spring up all over the universe, wherever the conditions are allow it to. This is actually a scientific point that ultimately science will either confirm or disconfirm. We are in the amazingly exciting position of maybe in our lifetimes, let's say in the next few decades, of starting to find the answer to that. I mean, the first generations of space-based observatories that may actually detect chemical compositions of extrasolar planets may, for the first time, give us strong evidence for the existence of life on other planets. That may happen in our lifetimes. That'll change everything when that happens. And I think that's possible. I don't think it necessarily is going to be found on every planet we look at. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem to be any life on Mars, although maybe it existed in ancient times. Again, that's an open question. We have rovers on the surface of Mars trying to answer that very question. But it's so exciting that we have the possibility of answering that. My guess would be that the universe is filled with life and possibly even filled with consciousness. And we're just so early in our evolution that we haven't yet detected the means of, we haven't yet created the means of detecting it. With regard to life visiting us here on this planet,
that was my second part of the question.
Yeah, I doubt it. I doubt it.
You doubt it,
I
really?
think that's where we have to be really careful of confirmation bias. We really want it to be true, and so we take all sorts of grainy videos and secondhand stories and things and translate that into reality. And I won't believe in actual aliens visiting our planet until someone shows me an alien or a piece of a spacecraft or something. And no one has produced that yet.
Stephen, we've already dreamed up the prime directive for ourselves, so why wouldn't an alien species do it as well and leave us alone until we were mature?
That would explain a lot. That would explain why it seems that UFOs are so elusive. But
frankly, I don't know why they'd want to visit us since we're so barbaric.
That may be why.
Killing each other. I don't know why they'd want to. But
yeah. This is where I really am sympathetic with Carl Sagan. In his later years, really drove this home. He wrote a book called The Demon Haunted World, as one example, and was really a proponent for people thinking rationally. He more than anyone wanted to see intelligent life in the universe. I mean, he more than anyone was responsible for supporting the SETI program, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, for talking about it in his Cosmos program, for writing about it. So more than anyone, he would be the one who would want to believe in these things. But at the same time, he knew that, and so he knew that's a surefire way of coming to the wrong conclusion, is when you start with a very strong bias. And so he argued for being aware of these biases, and especially in these sorts of cases, being extra critical, being extra skeptical of coming to those conclusions without extraordinary evidence. He said extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that's absolutely the case with intelligent non-Earth originated life.
Thank you so much.